So today we are talking about creating self-sufficient musicians in your classroom. And this is so important, especially since we are more than likely, some of us will be going virtual in the fall. And many of us were virtual for the back half of the spring semester. So it's very important that our students are self-sufficient in their learning with our guidance. So a couple of things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about learning how to establish a growth mindset with your students and encouraging grit among them. The growth mindset is a buzzword that you've probably heard in the last couple of years. And so we need to know how we're doing that in our music classroom. Also, learning how to be the example so our kids can imitate the things that we do in class at home or, when they are practicing on their own. We're also going to talk about developing great listening skills. And this goes above and beyond intonation. It's what to listen for and how to teach kids what to listen for when they're playing, whether it's assessing themselves or assessing others. And then also how to work your plan of action. So here's a great quote. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, and do more and become more, you are a leader. And I wanted to add that because a lot of times we just look at ourselves as band directors, conductors, but for some reason, we don't look at ourselves in the leadership role. And so we want to instill leadership skills in our kids, but we want to make sure that we're also instilling or making sure that we recognize that we are leaders too. So what we do, our students will do. Our students will be a reflection of us. So we want to make sure that we understand that role. So the first thing we're going to talk about is establishing a growth mindset. I do have a short video I'd like for you to watch. Some of you may have seen this before, but we're only going to watch just a couple of minutes.
The power of yet. I heard about a high school in Chicago where students had to pass a certain number of courses to graduate, and if they didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. And I thought that was fantastic, because if you get a failing grade, you think, I'm nothing, I'm nowhere. But if you get the grade not yet, you understand that you're on a learning curve. It gives you a path into the future. Not yet also gave me insight into a critical event early in my career, a real turning point. I wanted to see how children coped with challenge and difficulty. So I gave 10-year-olds problems that were slightly too hard for them. Some of them reacted in a shockingly positive way. They said things like, I love a challenge, or, I was hoping this would be informative. They understood that their abilities could be developed. They had what I call a growth mindset. But other students felt it was tragic, catastrophic. From their more fixed mindset perspective, their intelligence had been up for judgment, and they failed. Instead of luxuriating in the power of yet, they were gripped in the tyranny of now. So what do they do next? I'll tell you what they do next. In one study, they told us they would probably cheat the next time instead of studying more if they failed a test. In another study, after a failure, they looked for someone who did worse than they did so they could feel really good about themselves. And in study after study, they have run from difficulty. Scientists measured the electrical activity from the brain as students confronted an error. On the left, you see the fixed mindset students. There's hardly any activity. They run from the error. They don't engage with it. But on the right, you have the students with the growth mindset, the idea that abilities can be developed. They engage deeply. Their brain is on fire with yet. They engage deeply. They process the error. They learn from it, and they correct it.
So going back to our slides here, I'm sure many of us have seen that before, but what I would like to talk about today is how to do this in your band classroom. So establishing the growth mindset. First of all, we need to make sure we understand what those two mindsets are. The fixed mindset, those are the students who avoid challenges. They ignore criticism when you try to give them help. They believe that they can't get any better because talent is fixed, and they tend to give up easily. So those are the students who talk about, I'm a failure, and they put themselves down, and I will never improve. Why should I bother doing this? And I really don't care, which is just a cover up. Of course, because they do. But those are the students with those fixed mindsets. What we want is to try to encourage students to have a growth mindset. And this is going to be so important, especially as students are doing things outside of our presence, when they have to do things at home and turn them in. So those students are embracing challenges, and they learn from the feedback that you give them, and they display lots of effort. They don't give up, and they want to keep on learning. Those are those students who recognize that mistakes help them grow and that they're on the right track. And they'll say, okay, I don't have it yet, but I can do this. And that is what we want all of our students to be able to do. So why does this even matter? Well, having a growth mindset will help your students strengthen their self-esteem. And our students with low self-esteem are usually the ones who want to give up easily. And so we don't want that to happen, especially if we're doing things virtually in the fall. It helps to encourage self-motivation and drive. And of course, that's important as well. It helps us to face challenges and adversity. We don't want to quit as soon as you hit a roadblock. We want to make sure our students understand that just because there's a challenge and you have a little bit of adversity doesn't mean you give up, that you keep on going. And it also inspires commitment, adaptability, and resilience. Of course, that no quit attitude. So another thing that will help with this growth mindset, and we touched on it just a little bit, is developing grit. And I have one final video I want to share with you, just a couple of minutes.
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago,
Myra, real quick, you are muted at the moment.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm sorry, everyone. I didn't realize I was muted. So what we're talking about is establishing grit in our classrooms and making sure that the grit in our students, band students, are really good about doing it with a group, because as high school teachers, we do that in marching band and shows and performances and things like that. Middle school, elementary school, and high school teachers, we do that with concerts and things as well. What we want to do is we want to make sure that our students understand when it's time to do individual performance. So how do we make that happen? We have to focus on learning instead of achieving a grade, making sure that the students understand that even the smallest of improvement is an improvement. So focus on what your students are learning. Provide attainable challenges over a period of time. So small wins over repeated challenges, giving them small bites at a time. It's okay to let your students struggle as well. Sometimes we tend to be a little protective. I know I am, but it's okay to see them have a hard time. Because they need to understand that that is not a permanent condition, right? So reassuring that failure is not a permanent condition, just something where they are now, but it's okay and they're going to have to improve. Encourage your students to ask for help, but not only ask for help, but accept the criticism that they receive after they ask for that help. So making sure their ears are open and listening, and not just listening to respond, but listening to understand. And then reminding your students again that new things aren't always easy. Sometimes you have to work a little bit harder for some concepts than others. So what can you do, going back to that leadership role, what can you do in your class that you can demonstrate that your students can imitate outside of class? So we have a few. setting goals. A lot of times we will set goals, but sometimes we don't tell the kids what the goals are. So share your goals with your students and then make it a point to say, these are my goals. What are your goals? And perhaps ask them to share those goals with you. Have a plan for your rehearsals. Have a plan for your behavior. Because goals won't happen unless you have a plan to actually achieve those goals. Share your plan with the students and then ask them to share their plans with you. You're having a hard time with this passage. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? What's your plan to focus on working on this passage to make it better? Establish your routines. It helps you to prevent and correct bad behaviors, okay? And then just demonstrate all of these things. And we have a few things that you can demonstrate in addition to those. Admit if you don't know something. That's hard to do. Anytime a student will ask me something and they stump me, I'll go, I don't know, but I know I can find out. I'll let you know tomorrow. Or if you really want to flip it, I don't know, but why don't you go and look that up and share it with me in class tomorrow, or share it with the class. I'm curious to know myself. And it's okay to admit if you don't know something. If the students see that you are doing that, then they'll have a better chance of doing that themselves. Use your technology for good. It's interesting, I find, how some students will have all these smartphones and they'll use it to do all these apps, and they'll text message, and they'll get on all the social media all day, but they forget they have basically encyclopedias in their hands. So show them how to look up that fingering chart. Show them how to look up that piece of music that they want to use. Sometimes they actually forget. And it's okay for us to demonstrate that so they can do that as well. Being a lifelong learner is great. You're doing it right now by attending CSI. How many of you, though, have actually told your kids that you're here? So when you go back, share with them the fact that you have attended band camp for band directors, and that way they may be interested in attending some workshops on their own as well to help make them better if they see that you have demonstrated that as well. Incorporate macro, micro, macro. So I'm sure some of us have heard of this before. You take a large chunk of whatever you're working on and then narrow it down to the specific measures or concepts that you would like to do, and then go back and review at the end. Students should understand that that's one thing that they can do as well as they're rehearsing on their own. So if they know they want to do segment A to B, but there are 2 or 3 measures within that segment that they need to work on, then practice A to B, work on those measures, and then go back and put it in context. So make sure the students can understand that they can do that as well. Rehearse with a metronome. Don't over rehearse with a metronome, but use a metronome. Students will sometimes say, the metronome's not keeping up with me. And we all know what that means. So not only using it, but making sure if they record themselves and go back and listen, that they can hear that they are with or not with the metronome. And in class as well, it's okay to have a section to play and ask a different section what they heard about that. Recording and assessing is also something that may be a little hard for our students to do. It's hard for me to do. One thing I hate to do is watch myself conduct on a recording. So if that's ever been something that's a little shaky for you to watch, just imagine what our students are feeling like when they have to do recordings and then they listen to them before they turn them in. There may be a little bit of anxiety there. So it's okay. The more they do it, the more comfortable they will be doing it. And moving on to the next one. Let's talk about ear training just a little bit. So in school, we all think about ear training as oral skills, learning to identify the pitches and intervals and melodies, chords, rhythms, and other basic elements of music just through hearing. I would like to challenge you to think about ear training in a different way. Think about it outside of the box. And this is how. Do you know what's playing on the headphones of your students as they're going between classes, as they're studying, what they listen to at home? Have you asked? What have they told you? Is it something that you've never heard of before and that you've gone back to listen to because it was their interest? Do they listen to varied styles? Or do you assume that they listen to something just because they're a teenager? So be curious. Talk to your students about what they're actually listening to. And then that way you can relate what you are trying to teach them to what's relevant to them. Do you know if they listen to professionals who play their instrument? If not, give them a list. They may not know who to look up. They may not know who to talk to. Give them a list. And what about even a playlist where it's already made up and all they have to do is play? What about the pieces that you're performing or you want them to perform, whether it's chamber music or solo literature or full band pieces? Do they know how to access recordings to those pieces, professional recordings, or maybe send a playlist or set up a playlist of those as well? I'm not saying that you have to monitor what the students are listening to, but it may be you just want to plant that seed, saying that, okay, it's okay for you to listen to this as well. Now, here's a question. Do your students know how they are supposed to sound? So if you're not playing the instrument as a 6th or 7th grade teacher and demonstrating, and you're telling the students, all right, that's a great sound, or not so much, you need to fix this, let's try it again. But my question is, do they know what they're shooting for? Do they know what they're trying to sound like? So bring in a professional. If you're around friends, college friends, professionals that live in your area, ask them to come into your band room. College students may be around who are working towards becoming a professional. Graduate students would come in. And if you have your funding may not be great, that's okay. Let them know ahead of time. We'd love for you to come and demonstrate for about 15 minutes. And maybe I can come to your school and do something. So just use your resources. Playing recordings for students as well. If you're trying to teach march style and they've never heard a march before, how are they supposed to know what a march sounds like? So play those recordings and point out the different things in the recordings that you want them to listen to specifically. And then share a playlist. We've talked about that already. So I do have a poll for you, and we'd like to go ahead and publish that poll. So the question is, how comfortable are you asking your students to critique one another during class? And can we all see the poll? Paul, are they still not hearing me?
I went to publish your poll just to see if it's up yet. I'm beginning to see no's and possible yeses. So
Do I need to try to refresh?
I'm looking at the comments real quick. I'm getting a lot of nobody seeing the poll.
Can they hear me?
Yes, they can definitely hear you.
Okay.
Whoop, let's see here. Yeah. Actually, the poll just went red and everybody's seeing it now.
Wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to be quiet now.
Okay. Thank you all. Yes, you are showing a lot of grit. I really appreciate that. I'm just now looking at the chat and I see that a lot of people could not hear. I don't know when the sound came back on. Hopefully you saw the last segment. And the poll should still be up. And we're just going to give it a couple of more seconds. So the question for the poll is, how comfortable are you asking your students to critique another student's individual performance in class? So this is great. We have almost 600 people in the session, and it looks like about 80% says you're somewhat comfortable or very comfortable. So we want to make sure everyone else who is neutral or uncomfortable or very comfortable, we want to show you a couple of things that you can do to help with that. So I'm going to end the poll. And you should be able to see the slideshow. Thank you very much for letting us know. And so we're back to the slideshow. So a couple of things that tend to work for me to help develop those listening skills in class. So you may have heard of roses and thorns. If someone, or if you play a recording of them, do the roses and thorns. Have a student to say something that's good. Have a student to say something that's not so good. So what you're going to hear or see is you're going to have a lot of students who want to talk about thorns. A lot of students who want to talk about what's not good. So the goal is to have a good balance there. We want the students to be able to have good things to say so they'll know what to keep on doing, and the thorns, which are the things that they need to work on. Praise, correct praise is also something that you can do in your classes. Encourage your students, especially section leaders or anyone who wants to speak out, even in middle school. I really liked your tone, but I think that measure 2 was a little bit out of time, but keep playing with that great sound you have. All right. So just sandwiching those comments. That's also good for us as teachers to do as well. You can always ask them questions. Also things like, what did you hear in measure 3? How can we make that better? What do you believe we can do to make this more musical? Where do you think the peak of that phrase is? How do you think we should end that note? And then maybe do what the students are suggesting and then come back to them and say, all right, did we do what we suggested? How is that working? Do you like that? Can we go back and do that again? I'm going to go back to one more. Something else with this on this particular slide here that I like to do in my class is just in asking questions. And this one, this is where you have to get kids to understand that the criticism is constructive, and also how to how to give that constructive criticism. And I'm sure, going around and watching master teachers, throughout our careers, all of these suggestions have come from a lot of different places. And so one that I like to use, a suggestion that a teacher gave me years ago, is to ask the students what they think about another student's performance. So if you have your clarinet section playing and they should have done a really great crescendo up to a nice fortissimo and they didn't do it, ask the percussionist in the room, percussion, what volume did the clarinet players start? At what volume did the clarinet players end? Tell me what you heard. And sometimes the students will not want to answer. So it's okay to say, Myra, what did you hear? It's okay. Go ahead and tell them what you heard. They're tough. They have tough skin. They'll be able to take it. And so the kids have a tendency to go ahead and tell them what they heard. So our job, of course, is to make sure that the kids who are receiving the criticism understand that the students are not telling them what to do just to get on their nerves, that they're telling them, this is what I heard and this is what I think you can do better. So then who do you go to next? You go to the ones who just gave the criticism. All right, percussion, is your turn. Go ahead and play this segment for me. And then ask the flutes, what did you hear the percussionist play? So say you have the trumpet section to play something and you ask the class or a specific student what that section is playing. Don't tell them what's on the page. Just look and go, hey, trumpets, Lindsay said the top dynamic she heard was a mezzo forte. That's interesting. You want to try it again? Of course they want to try it again because they want to get it right. So they will do it. And they will do it even better than before. So I don't do this every day, but if you do it about once a week, your students know what's coming. So eventually what will happen is you will hear better things that are written on the page. So if there's a crescendo written, they will do that because they know you're going to ask someone around the room what they heard. And they want to make sure the game is for that person to get it right the first time. And so learning that constructive criticism works. Now, what about students who play individually in class? Sometimes we'll have a student to say, can I play my audition etude, or is it okay? We encourage our students to play as much as possible in front of each other, just to get the nerves out for when they go to auditions. And so we tell them up front, establish the rules. We're going to do a rose, we're going to do a thorn, or if you have something, praise, correct, praise, and they know what the rules are. And then you go ahead and do that. So a student will play. And then usually the first couple of times you do in class, the students don't want to talk. And that's okay. It may be that you have to give them something to talk about. Well, what did you think about the dynamics? Well, what did you think about this? Or what did you think about that? And have them answer your question. And then say, all right, Lindsay, Myra said she really didn't hear that forte. Can you try that again to make her hear it? And once you develop that culture, the students who are listening won't be afraid to play for their peers. And the students who are not listening, the ones who are listening to give feedback, won't be afraid to say anything because you have that mutual trust. So my question to you is, what will you do now after you've heard all of this? What will you do now after you go through all of your sessions here at CSI? So I'm giving you a little bit of a to-do list. You got to try to establish that growth mindset with your students. Encourage grit with a reminder that failure is not permanent. Make sure you set goals, that you create a plan, and that you establish a routine. But then you also tell the students what you're doing so they can imitate that. You have to be deliberate with your rehearsal strategies and encourage imitation. So if you say, I am going to turn on the metronome here because we're playing this a little bit out of time and I want to make sure we get this right. When you practice this at home, be sure you do the same thing. You have to make sure that the students are listening and understanding that you are modeling for them. Sometimes they won't always catch that. Develop those listening skills and develop a culture of constructive criticism. And then, as with everything that you do, you always have to go back and reevaluate what you're doing. I'm going to go to the chat now to look at some questions. And I also have an offer for you to download. And so this is basically just a handout that has your homework on it. Can you see? Let's see. You should be able to see the offer now. And if it's there, please let me know in the chat. And so the offer is really just your homework. So just a little self-reflection, okay? So your self-reflection on mindset, how you're going to have that mindset for your kids, how you're going to try to promote that growth mindset, what you can do to promote it, how you're going to get your kids to be gritty, and those rehearsal strategies and listening skills that we're going to work on. And keeping everything in mind that we may be virtual or we may be in person in the fall. All right, so I'm going to go to the chat and see if there were any questions. So as I'm scrolling through, I do see one. Well, the suggestions on how to teach the constructive criticism, constructive critique. So hopefully we did touch on that a little bit earlier. How do you make students more comfortable playing in front of their peers? You know, I think it starts with middle school. I think it starts developing that culture with that 5th or 6th grade or whatever grade that you do teach your beginning band. And so if those students are used to even playing one note or playing one measure, or let me hear that, and going down the line, as some of us will say, if that culture is developed from the very first time they put that instrument together and it's maintained all the way through, you're not going to have as many issues as when you first start. So making them comfortable, of course, some kids, depending on their self-esteem level, it will make a difference. There are some students that I've had that it takes them almost to their senior year of high school before they're comfortable playing. And those are the kids that sometimes will cry. And those are the kids that sometimes will just shake. And the only thing we just do is just say, you can do this. You can do this. And what will happen is that you'll see kids telling them the same thing. Great job. So even if they play one measure, that was really, really good. Next time, I want to hear you play 2. So just giving them in just really small bites. And we also want to think about going back to why the students say they hated playing in front of their peers. It could be because students were being mean. So that comes back to creating that positive culture and making sure the students understand that no, you don't giggle. No, you don't laugh. You're not going to make that a part of your classroom, and that we're all here to progress. And some of us do not, we all progress at different rates, and that's okay. And I'm scrolling again. So someone is asking about the slideshow being shared. I believe we are able to do that. I do know that there will be a recording of all of your webinars that you will have access to after the clinics are over. And so that will be there as well. There was a question about effective routines in the classroom. I'm not sure if you're talking behavior or playing, so I will touch on both just a little bit. So let's talk about behavior routines. What do you want your kids to sound like when they enter the classroom? Are they loud and rowdy, or do they know to talk with their inside voice? Do they know to come right in, grab their items and sit down? Do they know where to put their cases? Do they know where to put their books? Making sure that everything is laid out for them, no questions asked. And that way, if there's an issue, you can go straight to that issue and correct them. What do you want them to do in rehearsal? How do you want them to ask questions? Do you want them to raise their hands? Do you want them to just blurt things out? Having that routine there. And then at the end of rehearsal, how do you want them to get up? What's the noise level like? How do you want them to go into that room? Where do you want them to be when the bell rings? So just different things like that. As far as your rehearsal routines, it can be something simple as going through your long tones and lip slurs at the beginning, going to technique exercises next, and then applying all of those things that you do in your technique block. I think my mind is almost to marching band. If you go into your technical exercises and your fundamentals, that's the word I'm looking for, and then applying those fundamentals to your performing. And so the students can understand, all right, I am studying this excerpt and it's in the key of B flat. So let me go through my B flat scale and let me find some technical exercises I can play in B flat. And then I can go and work on that without actually working on the music. So just routines like that. All right, so there are some questions about grit and establishing grit within students. Encouragement from each other, encouragement from you, encouragement from the staff, not letting kids give up and reminding them that you're not going to let them give up always helps. I tell them it can be hard. You can take a day, but you're going to come back and we're going to try this again together, making sure that the students understand that you're their ally, that you're there for them. And even if they have a hard time, that's okay. It's okay to have the feelings that you have, trying to understand those feelings with the kids, and then going back with the baby steps and little chunks to do that. Would you change your approach for it all with beginning band? I actually had to teach beginning band for 10 years in my high school position. And a lot of the things, I'll just touch on that. The fifth grade band at the elementary schools were all taught by the high school teachers. So the great part is we saw the kids in fifth grade, the middle school teachers had them, and they came back to us in high school. So a lot of the approaches that I mentioned today, I did use while teaching beginning band there, in addition to the 3 years I taught middle school at the beginning of my career. But of course, everything you have to do at the level that the kids will understand. So if it's playing, the line 13 of the Essential Elements book, and a kid is having a hard time, but you want them to get used to playing in class and giving feedback, yes, you can do that with beginners, because you're training the kids who are listening, and then you're also training the kids to not be scared to play in front of their peers and eventually play in front of other people. So I think we have run out of time for today. So I want to leave you with this last quote. It is the supreme art of the teacher to awaken joy in creative expression and knowledge with your kids. And I wish all of you the best. I hope that you enjoyed the session, and please do have a great time at the rest of your time at CSI Connect. Bye, guys.